Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 1281 On return. It had gotten late again. After they finished visiting a few places on Mina's list, they took one of the invitations the elven receptionist had given them, to end the day with a secret rave. As a man who had not really left his house in recent years, Seth was almost as overwhelmed by the atmosphere of loud music, bright light and colorful folks. It was a good thing they got some practice during the recent victory and quickly got into the mood of things, making it a very enjoyable evening. Around 2 a.m., they hurried to the snake stop, to one of the few snakes that were scheduled to still go during the night. There were no pursuers this time. Maybe what happened yesterday was really just a coincidence. The snake safely brought them to their holiday resort and they used the elevator to get up the mountain cliff. Entering the lobby, they found the lights dimmed. Well, it was the middle of the night, so that was not weird. However, Seth thought there was something wrong when his eyes fell on the receptionist they had met on their first day, the one that had prepared the invitations for them. Her eyes seemed unfocused and her face was frozen in a calm, neutral smile. There was nothing out of the ordinary about this. It was late and maybe she was just tired. However, it reminded Seth of scenes from thrillers or horror movies. Something about this was unsettling. Following his intuition and considering what she had done for them, Seth decided to approach her. Although the auction was kind of meh, the restaurant was good and the rave was fun. The tower master had actually deliberated to scout her. Asking how she was doing was the least he could do. "Are you okay?" the bard asked, approaching the counter, his voice as soft as possible. Her head turned to look at him. The smile was visibly strained as it grew wider. Meanwhile, her hands were fumbling on the desk behind the counter. "Everything is, all right." "Why, do you ask?" she answered with some pauses in her speech. "Definitely weird." He leaned forward to look into her glazed eyes. She gave him another smile, cocking her head a little. While her head, expression, and shoulders didn't move, her hand slid a small note across the counter. The action was so sneaky, it was almost as if the hand was acting on its own. "Is that so? I guess everything is all right then," Seth said, not meaning a single weird. While he gave his neutral answer, he took the note as sneakily as the hand put it on the counter. Then, "Have a good night," he said and turned away from the counter, with the note in hand. Turning his back to her so she couldn't see it, he opened the note. Your room, just 3 words, scribbled in terrible handwriting like the letter of a weak and diseased person. It was obvious the writer had to muster a lot of energy and effort to create these barely legible lines. Seth glanced back at the receptionist. "Seth, what is it?" Mina asked, glancing at the note in his hand. "Did she give you her number?" Finn approached together with her and asked, giving the note a curious look. One look made clear this was not her number or an invitation to her private room, or whatever the girls expected. Their expressions turned serious immediately. "What are we doing? Do we go up?" Mina asked. The shadow assassin had already switched from vacation to mission mode. The fairy's serious expression told him that Finn was the same. Seth nodded, signaling them that he was still thinking. There was no way that whoever was in their room had peaceful intentions. Someone was waiting in their room to ambush them and they had done something to control the receptionist. Obviously, they had no intention to leave, much less to run away. What about her? Considering her strength, they can't be controlling her with any ordinary means, Finn mentioned, who was having the same train of thought as Seth. Seth was also worried about the elf. He had heard quite a lot about control spells, potions, skills and so during his journey with Finn and even recently in Delta. The receptionist herself was at least above level 50 and had stats higher than an Orihuma on the same level thanks to her heritage. "You are right, I have also been thinking about that, but," the blacksmith said. "It would take quite the means to control her like this. Something like this wouldn't just go away once the caster or controller died. These usually came with some kind of side effect, if the caster died before the means was neutralized. So they couldn't kill them, unless they accepted consequences for the elf. If only we knew what they did to her, maybe we could save her," the shadow mage mumbled to herself. Although she had simply muttered it with a hint of frustration, it gave Seth a brilliant idea. It reminded him of a skill he possessed but rarely ever used. The Land Remembers was an active skill on his ring Earth's memory he had created to support his earth magic spells. The skill allowed Seth to look into the memories of the land, to have a glimpse at what happened in a specific place in the recent past. Clenching his fist, Seth looked into the past of the lobby and his face turned very serious. In the penthouse above, sitting in the darkness of the unlit room, were a group of figures in dark blue robes and wide sedge hats covering their faces. Despite entering the room a sharp aura earlier, they had slumped a little after waiting so long. "Do you really think they will still come?" the fat cultivator asked his senior brother beside him, whispering in his ears. Are you doubting the strategy of the elder, Fatty Dong? They will definitely come back. The leaf ear below said that they booked this room until tomorrow, his senior brother warned him. The elder in question was an old monster in the middle stages of the spirit-severing realm. They couldn't afford to get on his bad side. But what if she lied, or warned them? The fat Dong posed a follow-up question. This time he received a slap to his rotund belly, but the warning came too late, the elder had already heard them. "I personally implanted her with my cursed mind larvae. Even if these weird races have some higher resistances, she cannot possibly resist my control, lie to us, or do anything to harm us, or the operation." "Dong Huan, are you doubting my gu arts?" the elder explained friendly, but the last question had a freezing edge to it. No, I would never dare to doubt Elder Bulet and Ge's insect skill," Fatty Dong hurriedly started to appease the elder. "I was simply becoming nervous and was too stupid to come up with a proper idea explanation," he added, shifting the fault to his own impatience and lack of intelligence. "Well, it's not like I didn't know you weren't the brightest. I will forgive you this once," the elder magnanimously let it go, sitting back on the soft sofa of the penthouse. He had to admit, these savages knew how to craft luxury items. He could even feel a faint flow of qi in the furniture. However, Fat Dong wasn't wrong. What took these savages so long? When he was sent as reinforcement to kidnap someone from Myanmar, he didn't expect this to turn into a drawn-out ambush like this. "Give me the jade slip again," he ordered his subordinate, to reread the mission details. The group initially caught their attention, because they were able to enter the secret store at the bazaar. That they could enter meant they were not weak, but it also meant they probably had bought something valuable in there. The scouts following them later confirmed the male to be a powerful earth wizard, which was what the savages called people casting outlandish elemental techniques. More importantly, they also caught a hint, that the three most likely had a connection with Myanmar, based on the interaction with the newly arrived pursuers who had been causing trouble all day. His hand quivered a little at the thought of capturing members of Myanmar. Just how much ransom would they be able to get from an organization like Myanmar? Maybe even a heaven-grade weapon? Even some earth-grade weapons would be good. The room had fallen silent for a while, when the door of the elevator sprung to life. The bright numbers above it informed of its coming. Their victims had finally arrived. Using sound transmission to give order, the group of cultivators got into position. Ding! With a clear noise in the silence, the elevator proclaimed its arrival. Chapter 1282 A Surprise. Ding! With a clear noise in the silence, the elevator proclaimed its arrival. As the doors slid open, an eerie whistle invaded the dark, silent room. It bypassed their focused minds and went straight to the bottom of their bowls, creating an uneasy feeling that gave them goosebumps. Even the elder, a man of 137 years, felt his heart sink a little. It was like a sound heralding death itself. With rapt attention, he focused on the elevator even more. The opening of the doors revealed two figures in dark armor. The light from the elevator, in contrast to the darkness of the room, made them look like martial warrior of manifested shadows. Their faces hidden in darkness, they exuded an inexplicable aura of danger. This was not what he was told. "What are you doing?" "Attack," he commanded the disciples. Although he was not confident in taking on the both of them alone, it was different with all of the disciples. If they could weaken the opponent and allow him to analyze them. Why was nobody moving? Suddenly the male figure raised his hand, his finger pointing straight at the elder, as if sentencing him to death. "That's him," the figure growled, and a silver streak appeared from behind the figures, shooting at the disciples with terrifying speeds. The projectile struck and shattered their life-saving talismans. Unable to react, they were flung through the room. Their stupor ended with the sound of ripping cloth and flesh, erupting in screams of pain and dying squeals. Across the room, his subordinates and disciples had been impaled, injured, or severed by weapons which grew from the shadows themselves. Was his intel wrong? Or was it the work from the female shadow? Where had the female gone? He was alerted by a fresh cry from the room. He barely managed to catch a glimpse of the shadowy figure finishing off one of the disciples. At another place, he caught sight of a short woman, happily beating the shit out of Fat Dong, who had miraculously survived the initial attacks. All of this had happened in a matter of milliseconds, not giving him the time to properly react, but now he was enraged. Seething, he tried to make a step but was suddenly hit by a terrible weight pushing down on his whole body, and an intense baseless fear. "You aren't going anywhere," the dark figure that was still in the elevator spoke in a joyful sing-song, devoid of any emotion. Seth had left the cannon fodder to Mina and Finn, while he used Dragon Might to pin down their targets and control the mini-boss. This was the guy Seth saw when he used the land remembers. The scene of this disgusting bastard puking out a massive maggot or larvae and forcing the elven receptionist to swallow the phallic beast was seared into his memory. This guy had to suffer for what he made Seth watch. Fortunately, the blacksmith didn't intend to kill him, anyway. The consequences his sudden death could have for the elf downstairs were unpredictable, so the bard had to draw out this battle until he was able to subjugate the man. Elder Bullet and GE Leave 165. The level was no joke, this was a powerhouse among cultivators. Seth was only able to see his level thanks to the constant influx of power of existence since the Battle of Delta and the levels he gained then. Despite the difference in level, Seth was not worried. Although the levels past 100 could be deceiving and a legendary item was not necessarily as potent as one would expect, Seth didn't trust in the fact that he had a legendary set, but in what it did for him. Although he didn't need to worry for himself, he had to make sure the boss couldn't use any large-scale skills. Antares on his arm and the giant's rod in his hand, he rushed toward the cultivator. He didn't choose the hybrid spear staff just to slowly torture the man into submission. Seth intended to hit him with several debuffs before Minas would join him with some of her. Most importantly, Pirithous Bind, which could hold him in place with a power based on Seth's strength, which was over 600 with all his items. Apart from that were the various plagues he was able to grant with Lysith, petrification and psychic damage from Antares' harrowing light. In addition, he wanted to beat him up and give the man a chance to beat himself, too. To Seth's shock, Elder Bullet and GE was actually a bug user. Not the bad kind, mind you, but the being suddenly swarmed by dozens of big fat beetles was low-key disgusting. The blacksmith was glad for the effects of Antares. The shield warrior trait covered him in a full-body shield. Although it was way weaker than his armor, it was more than enough to block the insects and even kill them. Thanks to Sargasticiphanes' revenge, part of the damage reflection was also extended to any and all shields and barriers he used. Even more annoying was the fact that he had this kind of bug-human power that allowed him to turn his body or part of it into a cloud of insects and evade his spear and earth spike strikes. The bard had to hit him with a single target attack to trigger the 50% chance of Pirithous Bind. "Ho ho, you are strong, but your attacks are simple. You can never strike me like this," the elder taunted and went for his own attack. Emerging from his budgified arm, something like a dragonfly with wings like blades stabbed forward, striking his left paw drawn. The blacksmith stumbled back in surprise. He had attacked a living creature, accidentally circumventing the weapon damage negation. Although it was not enough to get through the 40% damage reflection, 80% damage negation, 25% damage reflection of the shield barrier, and his overall defense. It did not even leave a scratch on his armor, but it was a surprise. Maybe the surprise was even a little bigger for the cultivator, as the weird sword insect in his hand had suffered the reflected damage, with a tragic cry as the edges of its wings crumbled. Seeing his approach not fully working, Seth decided to go a step further. If single target didn't do it, AoE would handle it. Desert Storm. Seth cast the rod skill to summon a Haybug which had a 20% chance to cause Pirithous Binding. He mixed in the advanced earth spell Petrifying Winds, which, together with the Desert Storm, quickly thinned out the insect clouds. This also ended his shapeshifter shenanigans. As the small bugs his body was made of, albeit strong, had a much lower resistance to the negative effects of diseases and petrification, he was now spamming. With the layers of debuffs, things finally worked out, but it still was no easy fight. The cultivator was a heavy-handed foe and Seth felt his punches through the armor, though much less than the man felt his own punches in his bones. Yet, the cultivator was tough as a nail and still kept fighting, despite taking his own damage. He used various items and consumables to block attacks, but those were quickly used up. While his feet were fused to the ground, patches of stone and blood started growing across his body as more attacks hit and the petrification took effect. The diseases seemed the least effective, so far, but that didn't matter. Now Mina. With Elder Bullet and GE half covered in stone and his feet stuck to the ground by another trigger of Pirithous Bind, it was time for the Shadow Assassin to strike with her shard of biting ice. She triggered the cursed frost effect and the half-petrified elder was cryogenically frozen in one go. Meanwhile, Finn had taken care of whoever survived Mina's shadow magic. The disciple lagged far behind their elder in power, all of them ranging in the 80s. Although cultivators were stronger than their level on average, they stood no chance against Finn. Using the chance of Elder Gu frozen state, Seth's arm slid around his shoulder as a group of instruments appeared around them. Everything up to now was to create a chance for Seth to serenade the cultivator. Seth had memorized the song a long while ago, since he had no items for this job. He used the time in the elevator to recall it. The problem was that the song needed some time to take proper effects and he couldn't have the target resist or run away in the process. It also didn't hurt if they were weakened and tired. You know that we will be mates forever. Step in with my crew and the future's bright. Chapter 1283 with new horizons to pursue. You know that we will be mates forever. What was this toxic sound? Sound arts? No, this was no attack skill, or was it? He experienced this feeling for the first time. The various instruments began playing an upbeat tune he had never heard before. It snuck into his conscious, creating the urge to move. His words stuck in his mind. What was he even saying? Was this an invitation? Someone from Minasmar was asking him to join him? Preposterous. If it wasn't for these annoying spells, he would have fed them to his bugs already. Once this ice was gone he would step in with our crew and the future's bright. He felt the music worm into his mind like an attack. He couldn't allow these savages to play with him. He was going to secure the resources of this land for his sect and become a Grand Elder. Why would he ever consider? We can't be beat if we stick together. Right, they were strong together, if he know. There was no way he would join a bunch of savages, he had to control himself. However, he could feel the tune seep into his body and mind and caught his own thought wandering to weird places. Dance with us as we skank through the night. Despite the ice holding him in place, he felt his body wishing to move with the rhythm. He had to control himself. But how? The incessant music kept surging against his mind, washing away his resistance. He had to get away from this sound, but his body was stuck. Finally, fear sprouted in the depths of his mind. He was quickly losing control of himself. Despite the upbeat melody of the song, a freezing, debilitating cold was taking hold of his mind. Stand up strong, put your arm around. Instinctively, his body wanted to go along with the music and put his arm around his shoulders. The happy song struck him like a command. No bark, no shout, no attack from opponent or superiors had ever struck him as terrifying as this happy tune, taking away his reason. It was like he became a prisoner in his own body. Even worse, his thoughts left the grasp of his will in tune with every beat. He was losing himself and what he was. It felt like he was sinking into a quagmire, vanishing in the darkness of his own subconscious. And follow along with this song. No. He couldn't go like this. There were still things he wanted to accomplish. He didn't want to, just vanish. Please. If this went on his whole being would. You're dead right, mate. Mate, he mumbled as the words repeated in his mind. Crack. Dead right, mate, the bard led the way. Dead right, mate, the elder repeated after him. Left right, mate, he stepped forward, dancing to the beat. The ice had shattered and he was released from the freezing shell. Even the patches of stone had vanished. I'm sure we will be mates forever, Elder Buletin Ge exclaimed in ecstasy, swinging his hips and shoulder to the hypnotic tune of the music. His bloody robes were flying around, as he threw his body around in wild clumsy dancing. Yeah, that's right, mate. Seth said, with a huge grin on his face, seeing the song actually bearing fruit. The prerequisite for the song to take root was that the target had to listen to the whole first verse without interruption. There was no way this could work in a chaotic fight, but it was easy with their target unable to move. The music fell silent and Seth signaled for Mina and Finn to remove the ear plugs they used when Seth gave Mina the signal to attack. This was another drawback of this music, apart from the performer, nobody was safe from it. It actually worked, Mina mumbled, watching the cultivator still dancing in joy. Seeing the formerly so serious and prideful-looking enemy, dancing around like a happy child gave her the creeps. And he is really on our side now. Finn whispered to the other three, so the elder couldn't hear her. Seth motioned her to get closer. Yes, at least for the next 3 days. Then it's up to his own luck, whether he regains clarity or the song claims his sanity forever, Seth whispered nonchalantly. A song that could brainwash someone this quickly had severe drawbacks. The effect didn't last for long, and when it stopped it would leave a damaged mind. It was not dedicated to any specific demon, but there was a chance someone would try to claim the person once the effects ended. As mentioned, brainwashing was always a tricky business. Whether Elder Buletin could return to his previous life depended on whether his mind was strong enough to overcome the song's effects and the potential demon daddy claiming his body and mind. But considering what Seth intended to make him do, Elder Buletin might have been better off not regaining his sanity. For now, just play along and treat him like a good acquaintance, I will do the rest, the blacksmith whispered to the two, before approaching the dancing old man. Using superior heal, Seth patted his shoulder, healing his injuries and getting his attention. Wow, thanks, mate. I feel a lot better now, the elder said, surprised. Hey, no problem, Buggy. Is it okay for you, if I call you Buggy? He acted friendly. Sure, mate, I like that name, Buggy answered, still grooving to the music in his head. Hey Buggy, do you mind helping me with something? The bard asked him. The cultivator, still in a good mood, finally stopped dancing and looked at the blacksmith like he was his best friend. Seeing an old stranger look at him like that even gave Seth the creeps. Of course, what can I do for you, mate? He asked friendly. Without the authoritative tone and arrogance, the man's voice had become deep and warm. If Seth had not seen him, mercilessly shoving a giant maggot down an attractive elf woman's throat, he might have actually changed his mind. Do you remember the receptionist? You put some weird maggot into her. Can you remove that thing? He asked the man to remove the thing, he suspected they used to control the elf. Buggy looked at him clueless for a moment. Oh, do you mean my cursed mind larvae? That could be a little tricky, since it will take root in the dantian of the person to take control of their body. If I tell it to come out, it will break out through the stomach, potentially killing them. I could pacify so it doesn't control them anymore, he offered as a non-lethal way of removal. Is there any reason other than the wound they might die? The bard asked for specifics. No. It's just that most people die from the shock when their dantian breaks, he explained professionally. If they get over that and you do what you just did to me, they have a good chance to survive. Good to know, then let's go. It was a good thing players didn't actually have something like a dantian, so it couldn't break. Once the elf receptionist had her stomach pierced from the inside and healed, she actually returned back to normal. Buggy, could you come outside with me? I have another favor to ask, the blacksmith asked him, seeing the look of the receptionist when she saw the man who shoved a maggot down her throat and had it explode from her stomach. How can I help you, mate? He asked, once they left the lobby, standing in front of the hotel. Buggy, I actually have a problem with a bunch of people wreaking havoc on my lands. You and people like you, we are friends now, but your former allies really get on my nerves. Could you tell me about them? Chapter 1284 Spilling like a reed letter. For 10 minutes he had Elder Buletin explain to him about the cultivators that tried to settle in the vicinity of Spring City. Apparently they were a loose coalition of smaller sects that decided to set up branches on Earth. Since the arrangement between the system god and the voracious cloud continent, Earth was no longer treated any differently from a new province of the cloud continent. This meant it became a land of opportunity for them to look for resources and land to settle. However, Earth was a dangerous place. Their continent had already been big, but it became vast with the connection to the pathworks. It also became filled with monsters, settling and growing outside of humanity's influence. Even cultivators with levels in the 80s had trouble just traveling the eastern parts of Earth, where it was connected to the cloud continent through a passage. Even when using their flying ships, which was in itself a risky undertaking. Hearing the cultivator describe the changes in the no man's land had Seth realized that he probably still underestimated their world. Although he didn't worry about Minas Mar, outside settlements like New Hope, where Pip came from, could be in trouble. It had not sounded this bad when the fleet commander from Epsilon came to them. However, Jonia Taggart and her people had been moving in a huge formation. What sane beast would try to attack a whole fleet of huge-ass flying ships? Their sects were too small to be able to send enough people to set up a branch in the wilderness, so smaller sects had the idea to settle in places close to Minas Mar that were mostly pacified. Although these lands were not safe, they were safe enough. To cross the wilderness, his and two other sects had entered a loose alliance and traveled together until they reached the central mountain range. They split up in the vicinity of Spring City. Although Seth asked, Buggy didn't know the location of the other sects. However, he knew the location of his own. Buggy, do you think you could take care of them for me? I know they are your former sect, but... No worries, mate. I see the error of their ways now. I will get rid of them, for our future. I will be back by noon. Elder Buletin swore to eradicate his former sect with his own hands. Exactly as the blacksmith intended. However... Ah, are you leaving right away? There was actually something else I needed your help with. My inventory has been filling up lately and I could use something to store items in. Do you think you could lend your storage ring to me? Seth couldn't just let the man leave with his loot. Oh, of course. Here, my storage ring. I will remove my mark. There is still all my stuff inside, I hope you don't mind. If you need anything, feel free to keep it. The elder leisurely handed all his treasure over to Seth, before jumping into the air and flying away to kill his own allies and subordinates. The bard watched the man leave and he felt slightly conflicted. This kind of effect made him feel really icky about mind control and brainwashing stuff. He absolutely didn't like to use it. If it wasn't for the elf and the sect hiding, he would have just killed Buggy on the spot. When he turned around to return back inside, he found Mina and Finn already coming out to join him in the cold night air. Is he gone? Mina asked, not seeing Buggy anywhere. Yup, he just left to get rid of his former colleagues, the bard said with a slightly conflicted expression. It will be okay, Mina supported him. Yeah, although mind control stuff is creepy, it's not like you do it for fun, Finn added. Thanks guys. Should we get back inside and loot the rest of them? The blacksmith suggested to distract his mind. Loot always raised his mood. We already searched their bodies and took everything of value. Let's go to our new room to look through the loot there. The receptionist offered us one for free, since the penthouse is now littered with corpses, Finn informed him excitedly. For a moment, Seth thought about looking for soul fragments and maybe taking their bodies back with him to turn them into golems, but he chased away those thoughts. This was his vacation and a bunch of leave 80+ bodies were not worth it. Unless he ripped them directly from their bodies, cultivator souls were also not really special. Yeah, let's get to our room. Although Seth was looking forward to the loot at first, he quickly found that the stuff the disciples had was rather, well, most of it was cultivator stuff. There were some pills the system judged as uncommon stuff that gave various common buffs, some books of techniques that didn't count as skill books, and talismans the blacksmith couldn't appraise. Interesting stuff like materials, potion ingredients, or magic items was scarce and the things they had were uncommon or rare at best. Seth had already seen the skill of some of these artificers, when he fought that weirdo from the Silk River sect, when he was ambushed. The items on these people showed a similar lack of workmanship. The continent seemed to be a very mixed place. On one hand, they had stuff like spatial rings and pouches that were something for the strong and wealthy, but not necessarily scarce. On the other hand, well-crafted weapons seemed like a rarity. The quality of weapons seemed to vary drastically even within sects and regions. Like the sword Elder Gok held, the primordial silver blade. Before it was broken by Python, it had good stats, and he got an interesting enchantment from it. Although it was all specialized for cultivators, it was an objectively good legendary weapon. He also suspected the leader of the Silk River sect to have wielded a legendary weapon, although he never got to appraise it. On the other hand, the crude meteor iron sword was also from the Silk River section. Maybe they stole the good weapons from somewhere else? Nam also had a good sword. He also said that his sect used to be one specialized in artifacts. If those places were regularly destroyed and looted, it would explain the huge discrepancy of good and shitty items. If good craftsmen hoarded their knowledge and were periodically killed for their items, proper knowledge on the craft could never propagate. Elder Buletin's spatial ring was a little better, mostly because it was a spatial ring Seth was able to use. Its contents were not much better than what the disciple carried, proving the man's words, that their sect was small and not overly wealthy. The best the elder had been carrying around were some epic-rated herbs he probably found in the mountains of Earth and didn't bring along from the Cloud continent. Seth had actually expected the ring to be full of insect stuff, before remembered that living things couldn't be put in these storage rings, same as with the inventory. This is kinda a bummer, Finn mumbled. The fairy had been a little excited, since it had been a while since she had the chance to fight and loot someone. Yet, their profits were not much better than going for a walk in their own herb gardens. Don't say that, this spatial ring is worth more than enough to me, the blacksmith said with a small smile. It was a good spatial ring with about 10 cubic meters of storage. It couldn't compare to his own legion, but that wasn't the point. Seth wasn't interested in the actual item, but in the material that allowed it to hold this space. With this, Seth planned to upgrade the alchemy station he had created. The blacksmith had already been planning on further expanding his spirit smithy soon, and this just allowed him to add another point of improvement. Nelith's efficiency would go through the roof once he had his own storage space. Let's show these talismans to Master Mountain, or maybe Daolun or Nam the next time we see one of them. I'm sure they can tell us whether they are useful or not. Let's go to bed for now, I'm tired, the bard suggested. Arjeed the two responded. Chapter 1285. I'll chase them anywhere. Mountains south of Spring City. A thunderclap under the clear night sky caught her attention. She lifted her hand, signaling for her companions to join up with her. Making sure they had seen the same, they decided to investigate the weird phenomenon. They had managed to catch one of the martial artists that were causing trouble in these mountains, but they had been unable to get anything out of him. The man was killed through some forbidden technique before he could talk to them. That was why they decided to scout the mountains in groups of tight formations to see if they saw any signs of sect formations or fortuitous places they may have settled. They had not been looking for weird natural phenomena, but a thunderclap in a clear sky could be a sign for battle. Sprinting across the partially snow-covered mountain landscape, they quickly arrived in an area that fit the common taste of cultivators for setting up a base. After a while, they didn't need to rely on the initial sound, as the noise of battle led their way. They knew immediately that they had come to the right place, when they found a place flickering between the scenes of two places. One was a narrow valley that led into a gorge, where a small stream originated. Inside the narrow gorge were several buildings wedged between the stone cliffs. The other scene was that of a simple valley, with a small well and no gorge at all. This was obviously a formation. She had to admit that this was a good place for a formation, too. It would have taken quite some time to find this if it wasn't for the fight, making the formation waver, revealing the hidden branch. Senior sister, what do we do? Her companion asked seriously. Someone was fighting down there. They couldn't tell whether they were an ally or it was just infighting, but the wave of energy released beneath the formation was on the level of a spirit-severing expert. We call the people of Minas Mar and observe for now, she decided grimly. Although she would have liked to pay back some of her debt here, she herself was only in the early stages of the nascent soul realm. She wouldn't be able to interfere in the fight down there. Worst case, both sides fighting could turn on them and wipe them out. Great White Tiger, this is Xiao Peng. We found one of the branches, but there is a fight going on. We need reinforcements here, she spoke into the small crystal ball one of the people from Minas Mar had given her. It was an intriguing alternative for long-distance communication. Is it where the thunderclap happened? We are on our way there, the female leader's voice came from the orb. She was a little disappointed that the tall tiger man had not answered, but she understood that this wasn't the time for such thoughts. A few minutes after they called, the fight below escalated. Various lightning attacks exploded from the branch buildings, leaving what remained of them in the gorge to burn. With the attacks, two figures came crashing into the valley. They were two old men, their faces distorted in anger. One was an older man with black hair and a thin long beard, the other was a man, even older with whitened hair. Despite his visible age, the white-haired one exposed a muscular build through his ruined robes. His whole body was covered in small arcs of lightning. Buletin Ge, you old weasel! How dare you betray the sect? As if harming the disciple wasn't enough, sabotaging the formation and attempting to me. This will be the day I end you, the lightning uncle hollered, smattering the other with rains of lightning fists. The other, Buletin Ge obviously had a hard time, but managed to block the lightning fist with a hand covered in a black, shiny carapace. However, as he was driven back, there was a cloud of insects rising from the burning buildings in the gorge. You old codger! Do you think your threats have any use on me anymore? I have found true friendship, something you could never understand. I'm fighting for something that truly matters, you can never defeat me, he countered as the cloud of insects descended on the lightning uncle and completely engulfed him. Lightning exploded from the dense cloud, dispersing and frying the insects, creating a crater of several tens of meters. The bug uncle was also thrown across the valley, his robes charred. Just what nonsense are you sprouting, friendship? Did you have a chi deviation and become a retard? Bug uncle pulled himself out from the mount of earth he landed in, ripping away the burned robes. Shut up! You will never touch my friends again. Even if it costs me my life. Oh! Red energy arcs were dancing across his body, as patches of dark, ugly carapace grew on his skin. This had to be a forbidden technique. Earlier, the lightning uncle was clearly stronger, but now the bug uncle's energy kept rising rapidly as his body turned into that of a human-sized insect. He was turning himself into a monster for friendship. She didn't know their history, but she found this truly touching. For someone to find the courage to oppose their own sect and leave everything they had behind, for someone they truly loved. Xiao Peng couldn't help but admire such fortitude. You imbecile! Do you think turning into a monster will save you? Dream on! The lightning uncle showed no manners and didn't wait for bug uncle to transform. He charged at the half-bug man, creating a huge trail of electricity during his charge. Lightning dragon descent, his voice echoed in the valley as the trail he left behind transformed into a giant dragon made of lightning that charged forward together with him, swallowing the bug uncle in the same moment his fist struck squarely on the man's chest. In a fraction of a second, the dragon's body gathered in bullet and exploded, devastating the whole valley below. When the dust settled, it revealed only the lightning uncle still standing. The massive black bus the elder had turned into was kneeling on the ground, charred black by the power of the explosion. You fool threw away your position, your sect, your humanity. You betrayed us for what? Friendship, the lightning uncle was slowly shaking his head. I don't know what happened on your mission, but I will find out and destroy everyone involved in this, he spoke with disgust. His speech was followed by a low thud. It's not over yet, the bug uncle mumbled after his hand, transformed into a barbaric insect claw had stabbed into the lightning uncle's stomach. Ugh, you stupid bastard, the white-haired one mumbled and crushed the charred bug skull mercilessly, ending this fight for good. He pulled the claw from his stomach as if it didn't bother him and then turned in their direction. Stop hiding and come out. It's rude to spy on others, he called them out. Had he known they were here the whole time? Who are you? Are you the friends he talked about? After asking that, he mused for a moment and continued. It doesn't matter, you will have to die since you saw the formation, anyway. Shit, disperse, she instructed. These two elders were in the middle stages of spirit severing, this elder might even be at the late stage. Their group stood no chance against such a threat. However, before they could move, the elder made a step, shrinking space in his movements and appearing right in front of them. Don't think you can run from me, little rat's cough. Thunk. Thunk dot thunk. Thunk dot thunk dot thunk dot thunk dot thunk. The moment he said it, his sentence was cut short by a swarm of angry arrows embedding themselves in his exposed chest. He ended his sentence with a torrent of blood gushing from his mouth. No, what is this evil? The lightning uncle mumbled, shocked and in pain. A dark, corrosive aura spread from the arrow wounds, turning his flesh a sickly, dead grey. Necrosis was quickly spreading across his torso. The lightning was rapidly circulating around the man, as he tried to force the terrifying energy out of his body, but he could only slow the inevitable spread of death. What a resilient bastard, even after such a fight. Xiao Peng heard the voice of the woman behind her, but when she turned around she saw the figure of a tall blue wolf, walking on its hind legs and holding a terrifying bow in its hand-like paws, approaching them from behind. Should I finish him off? The great white tiger beside the wolf asked. Thunk. As answer, the wolf had wordlessly pulled the string of its bow and shot an arrow of dark energy straight into the forehead of the lightning uncle. It happened so fast, that she could barely see the whole motion. In the blink of an eye, the life of a spirit-severing cultivator had ended, his body quickly decomposing into skeletal remains. Are you okay? The wolf asked as it grew smaller, turning into the leader of Mars party, Lydia. Why yes, thank you, she answered, still a little stumped. Let's go have a look at this place, before everything burns away. Chapter 1286. There's time to spare. It was nice getting in some exercise, but last night's battle had kinda ruined the vacation feeling. For the last day, they had no interest in running around in the spring city and decided to stay at the resort. The penthouse had been cleaned up and restored overnight, so they returned there for the day, spending most of it soaking in the hot spring and watching TV afterward. They needed a break from vacationing. Buggy never returned from his mission, instead Lydia contacted him early in the morning, informing him that they had found one of the hiding spots, thanks to what seemed like an internal fight. After observing it to the end, they swooped in and finished off the rest. He could guess what happened to Buggy. At least he died convinced of a greater cause. Friendship was beautiful. With a day of just lazing around and enjoying their company, their vacation came to an end and it was time to return to Delta. Seth had a lot of stuff to do now, he had been pushing off for too long. "We will stay here and help with the scouting," Mina suddenly revealed. It was evening and they were just speaking about returning to Myanmar the next day. Finn also seemed determined. Seth looked at them for a long moment. "Why?" he simply asked. Of course, he didn't want them to stay and take part in something with such a high risk, but they also knew this. Since they wanted to stay anyway, they probably had their reasons. "We also need to become stronger," Finn exclaimed with a raised fist. Finn and Mina were Leave 108 and Leave 111 respectively. Unlike Seth, who was able to gain power of existence through his creations and growing his fame through them, they had warrior specializations. They needed martial feats to grow their legends. As much as he wanted to stop and shelter them, he knew where they were coming from. Tisk, he leaned back in his chair, defeated. "Fine, but take the named golems along." "You no longer have Basilith with you," the blacksmith insisted. Since the golem had become the horseman of war, he had become important to Delta's defense strategy. From moment to the next, Delta had once again become the capital of Earth, although humanity had downsized quite a bit. However, since it became the prime target, they needed their trump cards there, in case something happened. Long story short, they couldn't just put Basilith in Mina's inventory as her bodyguard, anymore. Another point on the checklist of things Seth had to deal with in the foreseeable future. "How are the eggs?" he suddenly asked, as he worried about their safety. Depending on the growth of these pets, a bodyguard might become unnecessary. The Archwolf and the Behemothling were impressive beasts and had great potential. Although Seth had the bodies of the semi-legendary undead still stashed away in his workshop, any golem he created of them would probably end up as a temporary measure, once these pets grew up. But first they had to start growing. "We only unsealed them this morning, how are they supposed to be?" "Still an egg," Mina doubted the point of his question, but still answered with the status of the egg. They had wanted to do the egg business yesterday after they returned, but because of unforeseen interference, they ended up doing it in the morning. The process was nothing spectacular. Unlike when Seth met with Puffles or Tatzel, they didn't communicate with the eggs, or make a deal beforehand. Following Edgar's instructions, they simply unsealed the eggs using the scrolls they got from him and were able to register them as either a pet or a mount. All that was left now was to wait for them to hatch and then see how they would grow. It would probably take a few years before they could protect Mina or Finn to the same extent as Basilith, but that's what the golems were there for. "It's a shame you can't make them grow up faster," the blacksmith lamented. But even if pets grew faster with grinding levels through the system, it was probably too much to ask for them to become powerhouses in a matter of days. "We also have Lydia and Doho with us and Doho is almost Leave 140. "You worry too much," Finn said dismissively. The fairy brute was overflowing with confidence, despite facing an opponent she couldn't beat just last night. Even as a chosen of a god and legendary equipment, it wasn't easy to kill an opponent this many levels higher than oneself, especially above the Leave 100 mark, as people could develop weird and terrifyingly strong skills based on their path. This was still the case even for cultivators who followed a different power system. Again, even Seth only dared to do so, because he had his armor to tank almost anything and throw part of his back, in addition to his own attacks. Fine, I get it. But you have to listen to Lydia while you're here," he insisted. Once the two agreed, they ended that topic. The last evening of their vacation was too precious to be squandered on such discussions. Seth rather used it to give them a proper farewell, all night long. The furnace was blazing and the sound of hammers filled the large room. The blacksmith had returned to his workshop, where his supporters, the small golden dwarf Sivri and the massive three-faced golem, Cerberus, were tirelessly working to create items for Myanmar and grind his skill proficiency. Even the newest entry to his line of automation, Nelith the alchemy station, was diligently brewing a potion, being regularly fed with ingredients by one of the apprentice alchemists that usually worked and learned under Allison. Since Nelith began working, his alchemy has risen from Craftsman Leave 3 to Craftsman Leave 4, without Seth even brewing any of the potions himself. Now, that he had a proper catalyst, he would also be able to grant Nelith his own inventory, then the apprentice alchemists wouldn't have to come as often. The loud sound of the big hammer stopped first. Then Sivri looked up from the jewelry she was working on, realizing that the owner of the smithy had finally returned. Although she was not the first to see him, she was the first to speak up, since Cerberus was mute. Seth, you are back from vacation, she exclaimed happily. How was it? You have to tell us everything, she started speaking all bubbly. He didn't even get the chance to ask her anything before he was caught in a conversation about the trip. Although the blacksmith had returned in the morning and successfully dodged any long, tedious briefings with Lena, he ended up being interviewed by Sivri, who was eager to hear his stories about the things they had seen and bought. You gave away that cursed thing, the golden dwarf exclaimed, shocked, when Seth told her about Urka's specialty shop and how he traded away the legendary cursed weapon. Yup, I exchanged it for a truckload of medicines to permanently increase attributes and stats, the blacksmith admitted with a smile. So? Sivri asked expectantly. So what? Seth asked confused. How much did you gain? She rephrased her question, asking how much Seth had gained from all those medicines. Nothing, yet? I'm not going to pop those like candy. Except for the ones I have double, I will keep them so Allison can analyze and copy them, the blacksmith explained, as if this was the most obvious thing in the world. Seth hoped they would be able to make these medicines themselves, if Allison managed to analyze the recipe. Then all of Minasmar would be gaining a lot. I see, the golem said enlightened. Seth continued recounting. After the short interruption, Seth kept talking about the procession and meeting Senior White. When he started talking about the next day, he finally got around to mention the pet eggs, when talking about excellent beasts. Pet eggs? Sivri asked curious, prompting Seth to keep explaining about the pet egg business they had found in Spring City. Since she had never heard of this either, Sivri was especially curious and kept asking about the grades and the device Edgar used. Now that I mention it, I will have to visit Evan later, to give them to him. Seth and Sivri talked all the way until early noon, when Seth finally ended his tale. For a moment he deliberated to start working or visit Evan first and decided on the later. It was not like he was pressed for time right now and he wanted to finish all the quick errands on that matter. Chapter 1287 lets me share this whole new business with you. After finishing his talk with Sivri, Seth left his workshop. He decided to visit Minasmar's stables on his feet and not to use the tower to teleport him there. The domain of Evan had moved outside of the tower's underground some time ago, giving Seth the chance for a little walk through Mina's march. Climbing his way up from the bowels of the wizard tower, he left through the entrance hall. He crossed the booby-trapped magic bridge that led over Bottomless Chasm, to reach the guardhouse that defended Minasmar's only entrance, apart from the elevator to Delta. The stables of Minasmar had become a similar structure to the guardhouse, though lacking a direct connection to the magic tower. Chambers were hewn into the mountain cliffs with hidden entrances for the animals. Outside of these stables were a few large pastures, fenced off and hidden by barriers, to make sure nobody accidentally found the beast farm. This was the place they built for Evan, then Minasmar's underground became unsuitable for his husbandry. At this point, the pastures were mostly inhabited by the alpacas, the chosen of Hermes' breed. They were the main mounts used in Mina's march. Apart from them, Seth heard he was relatively successful breeding the titanoboas, but the giant snakes stayed indoors, just like the few dungeon worms he had hatched. There was also a variety of beasts he had tamed during training, but those were the trees he had been breeding for a while now. Seth had not visited here often, but the sight left him with no doubt that Evan was going to succeed in reliably breeding the pets he brought. Seth? What are you doing here? Evan exclaimed in surprise when he saw the blacksmith trudge over through the snow. The tamer was carrying a huge basket of stuff that looked like hay and vegetables. Probably feed for the alpaca. Hi, Evan. I came because we bought you some gifts in Spring City, the blacksmith said. Gifts? Evan asked confused. Seeing his confused look, Seth found himself forced to explain the story about the pet eggs the second time today. How interesting. Beasts that propagate through eggs, disregarding their biological classification. I really want to see it now. Although I feel that casting preservation magic on an egg could be harmful, I have to admit that it is a good idea, if you want to sell them, Evan thought out loud, repeating some of the stuff Seth said. Long story short, we brought you several pairs of eggs you could try to breed for yourself. It was actually Mina's idea, that's why there are 5 subterranean terror birds. Since we thought it was a good idea, we doubled down on it, Seth explained with a smile and brought out the egg boxes. All except the highest grade pets and the pair of slimes. The lower rock and the mountain king would be given to members of the field teams, once Seth spoke about them with Lena. There was only one each, so it was pointless to give them to the champion of husbandry, for now. The slimes were obviously for Ellie, once she returned. Whoa, is this for real? These are real eggs with mammals inside. Fascinating, Evan exclaimed, looking into the egg boxes. It was obvious that he had an appraisal skill for these eggs. Here are the scrolls to dispel the preservation magic. I guess you can take care of what comes afterward yourself, right? The blacksmith asked jokingly, handing Evan the over 24 scrolls he needed to unseal the eggs. Of course, you can count on me. Just you wait, in a few months, everyone in Minas Mar will save access to a variety of powerful pets and pet eggs, Evan said confidently. The light in his eyes was shining brightly, looking forward to the future. Great, I knew it was a good idea to bring these to you. If you will excuse me, I also want to start working in the future. Seth gave his farewell and returned to the workshop. This time he did use the teleport function. Seth, you are back already. Sivri greeted him once again. Yup, I just explained things to Evan and explained some stuff. He will know how to go from there too, the blacksmith said with a shrug of his shoulder. Now then, did Tord manage to prepare the stuff I asked for? Seth asked Sivri a question he didn't have the chance to ask all morning. Before he left, he had asked the Dwarven Master for some help to refine some materials while he was gone. Oh right. Yes, he finished, the materials are in storage safe 1, the goldsmith answered, pointing at one of the doors and chambers lining one of the walls of the workshop. Although they had inventories, they had established shared material storage rooms and safes, to allow all blacksmiths access. The safes were a little special, as not everyone was allowed to open and take stuff out of them. Especially NR1, as it was the storage meant only for Seth and Tord. Since it held relic-rated and legendary materials, only the master blacksmiths were allowed inside. Great, he really outdid himself, the blacksmith exclaimed, finding what he was looking for on one of the shelves. This was a stack of relic-rated refined fey steel. Why did he suddenly bother with a metal that was only rare in its base form and needed difficult refinement to reach the status of a relic? Although Seth had a lot on his plate, what he intended to start with was not Nam's legendary item, or the semi-legendary undead bodies, or refining the legendary materials harvested from those bodies, definitely not Dowlun's robes, and not even the improvement of the alchemy station, Nelith. The blueprint of Nam's master was incredibly complicated. Deciphering and translating it into something he was able to use with his expertise and system skills was an incredibly hard venture. This was why Seth intended to get help from an enchanter. However, he didn't want to ask Alzalsar. He couldn't always rely on her to solve his problems with a snap of her fingers. Neither was Grant May an option, as his level was still too low to be of much help. No, what Seth decided on was the next step of improving his spirit smithy. All aspects of forging were covered with Cerberus and Sivri. With Nelith, he also covered not just potions, but also inks and acids for demonic etchings. What he was missing was a proper enchanting support. Of course, he had the enchantment table, which was a great help, but it could only help him with enchantments a blacksmith dealt with, not with arcane enchantments an enchanter or sorcerer would use. He did consider upgrading the existing enchantment table, but decided his own idea was better. The core of this idea was a soul he received a while ago, in exchange for mailing the wedding ring and legacy of a great man who died an untimely death back home to his freshly wed and widowed wife. The genius enchanter's soul, big, epic, ego, of Augur Urson, that was bestowed to him by the system. What had surprised Seth, was the perfect separation of knowledge and personal memories. Although he suspected this to be the soul of Augur Urson, the soul was actually a blank slate, despite holding an ego that could communicate. The blacksmith liked to believe that this wasn't the actual soul of the man who suffered a tragic fate, but one created by the system that simply inherited his memories. The alternative, the system erasing everything that made Augur Urson, himself, didn't sit as well with him. It didn't stop him from using the soul, but he would have felt sorry. On the other hand, he was planning to give his genius a second chance to shine, so that should have been okay, if that alternative was true. Yes, instead of using this soul to upgrade his enchantment table and potentially losing the soul's expertise and wisdom, Seth decided to create a third workshop helper. He intended to create the body from the refined fey steel. Although this was not the most durable metal, it was actually above Ithilden when it came to monoconductivity, making it the prime material, not just to infuse a soul, but also to create a mighty sorcerer/enchanter from. Someone who was one of his own people, a part of his skill, technically his own power, and would be more than qualified to help him translate the cultivator blueprint. Alright, let's get started. Chapter 1288 A Whole New World, 2. Pararian. Looking into the distance, she found a sprawling city, filled with houses built from a mix of wood and stone. It was clear with one look that the city had organically grown, seeing the winding network of cobbled streets and muddy paths. The biggest indicator, however, was probably the lack of another city wall. An almost 15 m tall wall, clearly visible from their location, divided the city from the slums that had grown uncontrolled at the foot of the walls. Over the past days, Monique had found out more and more about the world beyond the cave system. This was the capital of the Clow County, where they would meet Count Clutcher, the local lord of this territory. As the garrison commander had promised, the day after the demonstration of the Titans, the delegation from Minas Mar was escorted out of the castle by a group of soldiers who brought them here for their audience with the lord. The night before they left, Monique had sat down with Jonah and Jane to share their information so far, or rather hear what Jane had managed to get out of the garrison commander. According to her, this county was actually part of a genuine empire, the Purican Empire, that controlled the whole continent called Pararian. Like Monique, Jane also found the overly welcoming reception slightly suspicious, but she also only managed to conclude something from the vague remarks and gaps in the conversation with the commanders. The merchant suspected that the current state of the empire was not the rosiest. As they had proven the strength of their kingdom by conquering a demon beast cave from within, it was likely that they were seen as potential allies, or tools in whatever was going on in this place. Either way, if it helped them quicken their mission, it was all for the better. Monique was glad that it was Jane's and the non-combatant's job to do diplomacy and negotiate trade deals. Since she just had to make sure they were safe in the meantime, she was able to focus on experiencing this new world. The group had another chance to impress the garrison commander and soldiers when morning came, and they intended to set off. When they came down to the court in the center of the castle, the group of escorts was already seated on horseback, waiting for them. "Are you sure that you won't need any carts, Lady Jane?" the garrison commander asked, still unconvinced. Apparently, he had spoken with Jane about the transport to the capital. The journey would have taken several days using carriages and carts prepared by the locals. Weighing times against convenience, the merchant had decided to reveal that they had their own mounts and that they would not need carts. Jane had briefed them on what to do, when they assembled at the court. So, after the garrison commander stated his worries, everyone in the group summoned their mounts. Most members of the expedition owned alpacas, bred by Evangelist. They looked like a mix of horse and alpaca, just as big and enduring as a horse, but more suited for mountainous environments. Soldiers and horses were surprised at the sudden appearance of beasts, but they knew magic, so it was not that overwhelming. What had them reeling was when Monique and Jonah brought out their mounts. The two had spent several weeks traveling through system worlds to increase their level of existence. Of course, they also picked up some good things during their travels. One of these things was their mounts. Monique's mount was a Leve 94 freezing lioness, an almost 4 meters tall, lion-shaped monster with ice powers. It was a rare mount that could also fight alongside her and had been playing a great role in her journey, as the caster of her solo party. However, it paled in comparison to Jonah's mounts, who brought out a sleek, ink-black Mustang with glowing red eyes and a dark demonic aura. The mysterious being of darkness, beauty and elegance perfectly fit the chosen of Munera, goddess of gruesome beauty in battle. It was also her first time to see his mount, so Monique instinctively used Athena's scry to judge the power of the other party, revealing the beast to be a named monster. Shadowmane Leve 99. Was it really his mount? A beast like this would have been fit to be his pet, too. The soldiers had to put some effort into calming their horses and themselves at the sight of two such powerful beasts. With their level, they estimated their mounts were at the upper levels of power in this world, although the soldiers probably couldn't see it. They were more impressed by size and appearance than anything else. The commander's worries were also gone at this point, but maybe he had a few new ones. However, Jane only smiled at him with a cheeky smile and asked, "Didn't I say we had our way?" That had been 2 days ago. Now they were on the road for a little over 2 days and the soldiers' initial shock was gone. They were actually a little proud to escort such a retinue, as they caused lots of awe and glamoring on their way. The cave they came from was actually situated in a small mountain range at the western edge of the continent. This place was only sparsely populated. As they descended they passed mostly empty land, but also came across a handful of small villages and farms, where they would stay for breaks or the night. Monique's initial perception was further confirmed on the way. Pararian really was like the typical fantasy world introduced in most high fantasy novels, with a mix of sword and magic. She found that although magic was not everywhere, its existence was common knowledge even in these rural villages. They crossed between the fort and the capital. What came as a little culture shock, even after experiencing a few system worlds, was that every village had at least a small chapel. Bigger ones had a church. Religion was not really a thing on Earth, at least not until the apocalypse. Although she had heard about religion at the fort, and Jane had also mentioned the Radiant Church was the state religion of the Empire, but she had not expected it to be this serious until she saw it with her own eyes. With this great of a presence, religion was expected to have a huge influence on the people in this place. Looking at the city beyond the walls reminded her of this gain. In the city were two tall buildings, reaching above the rest of the buildings. One was the Lord's Castle in the center, around which the whole settlement had developed. The other further to the left of the center was a cathedral built from creamy white stone. Unlike any other building in the surrounding area, it looked ornate and artistic. The polished copper roof shone in the light of the midday sun, and Monique even thought to see the many-faceted stained glass windows. "Beautiful, right?" the captain of the escort soldiers commented, when he saw her staring off in the distance. Monique looked over at the man who looked like a textbook foot soldier. Although the world had magic and even something like mechs, these normal guys wore simple padded jackets. The captain wore a mail on top. "Arim, sure," she answered awkwardly. Was this beautiful? She had just been trying to get a proper overview of the place. Monique looked back at the capital of the county. The city was filled with medieval houses made of a mix of stone walls and wood. The only thing she could call impressive were the cathedral and the Lord's Castle. It was okay, if not for the ramshackle slums made up of clumsy wooden shacks and muddy paths. The man smiled wryly, seeing her second look. "Yeah, it can't be helped. Many have fled their villages and homesteads because of the news of monsters roaming the land. They would rather live in the dirty slums at the walls that offer safety, than staying in their own homes," he said with a sad look. The chosen of Athena was a little surprised. So this was not the status quo, and there were still people with enough sympathy to feel sad when seeing this kind of sight. Maybe she had been a little prejudiced to these folks for their rural lifestyle. She couldn't call them primitive, because she felt it was mean and a little wrong, since they did have magic technology. Something like the Titans definitely wasn't primitive. "We all experience hard times sometimes," she simply stated. Chapter 1289 A Rotten Place. Beta, west of THRES. "Do you think it was the best idea, to leave Allison in charge of THRES?" Linry asked, a little worried. After subduing the incompetent mayorman that assumed leadership after Adam went missing, they had spent a few days at THRES organizing the situation, before their party set off, asking Allison and the botanical team to look after the tree station until they returned. "Don't worry, there are also Evie, Edward, Bulko, and James to keep the other three balanced. We just have to find Adam before things get out of hand." Mike acknowledged the danger of his decision. Well, the danger was mostly for the mayorman they had captured, so nothing too bad could happen, but still. As he mentioned, Mike and his group of field team members had set out to retrace the route Adam was supposed to take to return to THRES. The governor had spent the past weeks and months smuggling refugees from Emerald City to THRES. Many of the people stuck in Emerald City were former residents of Beta, who either got there from Beta, or were taken along during the Great Strife, when companies from Y City and Delta hired colonists for the unclaimed mountains. As a resident of Beta, it was only natural that he tried helping his fellow district citizens. He also took the others along, as his ultimate goal was retaking Beta for the people of Earth, even if it was in the name of the Muir Empire. At least, this was as Mike understood him. The chosen of Mahis himself had seen the horrors of Emerald City, and if it wasn't for his mission at the time, he would have helped Adam himself. When contact with THRES was lost, Mike actually worried whether the cyberworms or Emerald City got their hands on the governor. Adam was strong enough to compete with the questing beast, Blotches, but with Emerald City's connection to the Cloud Continent, they might have been able to overwhelm him. If that was true, they had to find out where he was held and free him. But if he was infected by the worms, that would have been a terrifying outcome. The worms not only controlled people, but they also slowly turned their bodies into something like metal, strengthening them in the process. If someone like Adam underwent that process, it would create a terrifying monster. "Okay, but why didn't you leave command to Adam's people?" "She has her own mission after all," Linry commented. As part of organizing the situation, they had released Adam's men from the cell where the usurpers held them captive. Yet, Mike had asked Allison to pause their mission and guard THRES while they looked for Adam. You have seen what happened to them without Adam. A few weeks without their leader and the mermen captured them. I don't want to return, only to find all doors closed. As expedition leaders, only Allison has the authority to control the Guardian Tree, apart from me, Mike explained his decision. In case the mermen tried some kind of trick again, the wizard and the rest of her expedition team would be able to subdue them and protect the base to return to. He couldn't trust Adam's people with something this important. Not after they already failed once. At least it doesn't seem like the cyberworms have reached this far, yet, Misto commented. They had left THRES 2 days ago, riding their mounts and had crossed about half the district, retracing Adam's route and looking for clues of his disappearance. Although they had been facing strong beasts, even came across some monster settlements and some of the weird beasts that spawned with the awakening of the slumbering realm, there were none that fit the description of being half machine or partially robotized. No cyborgs or androids had crossed their way so far. Don't jinx it, Ray cautioned the demon. The Chosen of Solfium had no interest in seeing anything like the hashing bird ever again. Even if he was the champion of the god of darkness and evil magic, that stuff was too fucked, even for him. He didn't even want to come, but as someone who had spent a lot of time traveling the unclaimed mountains, his participation was mandatory. You are right, Misto. I would have expected to see at least some of them around here, Mike agreed with the demon. By the time Mike left the unclaimed mountains, the worms had already reached Emerald City. There were no natural barriers like the border storm that could have stopped them from descending the mountains and overrunning Beta. Arim, guys? What is that? They heard Ellen suddenly exclaim, pointing at something in the distance. They all followed the direction she was pointing. Straight again, far down the road, something was crossing the path they were taking. Appearing in the gap between high-risers was a massive creature, resembling a fat giraffe, wearing a massive sombrero. From the expansive cap, a dark, dense mist was descending onto the surrounding streets and buildings. From this distance, it seemed slow and lumbering, as it passed the street on 4 thick legs, but comparing it to the buildings it passed, it had to be at least 120 meters tall. Seeing the appraisal result, Mike couldn't help but curse. Colossal Fungulate Leaf 91. Flowering. A giant living mushroom beast of the fungulate family. They spread spores when flowering to create a mushroom biome and spawn more fungulates in the vicinity. Not only did it remind Mike of some terrible memories for the time their party just started diving into the abyss below the Holy Land of the Adventurer Guild, but Mike also recalled something from almost 2 years ago. At the time, Seth and Jonah had faced the field boss of Beta, a giant living dungeon in the shape of a deer. The description of the dungeon and the appearance of the beast that just vanished between the building of the city was very close. It was also a fungulate, but not a living dungeon. Did that mean one of the horrors of the abyss had been happily spreading in Beta for over a year? No, there was none of it when he came through last time. Lydia and Ray had not mentioned anything like this either. Ray, did you hear anything about mushroom beasts in Beta while you stayed at the unclaimed mountains? Mike made sure. Arim, there were mentions of the field boss, but nothing like that, Ray answered, still staring in the direction of what they had just witnessed. Whoa, it's growing really quickly, Tecker commented, causing everyone to take a second look at the place the mushroom giraffe just passed by. Their road, the gap between buildings, was quickly filled by the bodies of mushrooms growing from the spores. At first it was just like black fuzz, spreading across the surface, but soon bodies of huge mushrooms of various shape and color shot from the moldy fuzz, closing the gaps between buildings and cutting off the road they were traveling on. Great! How are we supposed to get through that? Shay exclaimed, gesturing at the wall of fungus. It was clear to everyone that he didn't mean just this specific wall. They all had appraised the creature. Beyond that was a whole region of mushrooms like this, and it was probably full of spores that would kill them from the inside out. Don't worry, honey, you have me after all. Ellen struck a pose like a true hero, sitting on the big green, blob-shaped slime she used as a mount. Ellie? Shay asked, blushing a little. Ellen, you have a way? Mike asked her. If she really had a solution, that would have been great. Otherwise, the Catman had been seriously considering circumventing this place, even if it meant losing on some clues. Of course, didn't you know? Slimes are the natural enemy of mushrooms. Although my babies may have some trouble beating that colossal one, the grunts won't even be a challenge, she claimed confidently. This giant bell slime can also shield us from the spores, she added, bringing out a green slime the size of a gymnastics ball, which had a distinct bell shape. The creature hopped on the ground and proceeded to grow to the size of a garage, turning almost transparent in the process. They usually hunt like this. We can enter its bell and it will filter out the spores as we go on, she promised. Mike was not 100% confident this was what he wanted, but he was quite sure that he didn't want to pass through the mushroom territory without this. Well, if everyone is okay with this, I will put our journey from here on in your hands, Ellen, Mike decided, looking around to see if anyone disagreed. Although some weren't happy about entering the stomach of a slime, nobody disagreed. All right, let's eat, my babies, Ellen exclaimed, releasing a horde of slimes. Chapter 1290 A Professional Chase. Minas Mar. Seth was actually a little nervous. This was only the second edition he ever created for the Spirit Smithy. Also, he had made the alchemy station, Nelith, completely from the maestro's souls, without adding any corporeal materials. But that was not all he was worried about. In preparation, the blacksmith had talked with Sivri about her production process, but as one could expect, she didn't know herself how Forgebrand created her. This meant this one was solely for Seth to explore. However, he had an inkling since he had Sivri and Cerberus as examples. In their essence, they were ordinary golems, with every part of their body infused by the soul that is controlling them. Most importantly, they solely relied on the ego of the souls and had no automaton circuit or anything in the regard. Technically, they were golems with everything a golem needed, except a control center that was connected to everything. In this regard, they were quite similar to the very first iteration of golems he learned to make based on Forgebrand's original designs. The golem seeds created by engraving souls, that were able to create a functioning golem body by drawing in materials from their surroundings. However, those had been very inefficient as the bodies created were generic and rough golem creations that could never fit the soul controlling them. As Seth understood it, Forgebrand had improved on this with the Golem Forge. The Golem Forge could take the former body of the souls, preserve it and strengthen it, and then Forgebrand could have infused the soul into its former body, one that was most fitting to it. The bard glanced over at Sivri and Cerberus. If there was one thing that had kept bugging the blacksmith, then it was that with every skill he had unlocked and every piece of the Spirit Forge that was added starting with the Golem Forge, he felt like Forgebrand was trying to cheat death and revive someone. He had heard quite a bit about the dwarf from series. Forgebrand had been righteous in his earlier years, but also cruel in using his skills as a form of punishment for the wicked he slew. He also met him during the first and only time he died in a dungeon, but that wasn't a very informative meeting. The darkest impression he had gotten from Forgebrand was as he progressed to unlock perks and spoke with Sivri. Listening to her, gave Seth a feeling that Forgebrand had been driven to commit terrible acts and taboos in his pursuit of a specific goal. Why did he think that this goal was to revive someone? Using the Golem Forge to create a perfect body and adding the function of the soul refinery, that allowed him to strengthen and refine a soul with high precision. This was far beyond just trying to create powerful golems. However, the most important factor was the golden dwarf currently hammering on an accessory. Maybe Seth didn't have the highest EQ, but he wasn't dense. Seeing how Sivri talked about him, it was clear there was something special between them. Why would he turn someone precious to him into a slave of his skill? Probably because he had no other choice. Continuing from earlier, if the Golem Forge was able to create the perfect body by preserving the old one, what was he supposed to do if he didn't have the old one? In this regard, Seth actually had an edge over his predecessor, simply by the fact that he randomly chose a fitting secondary class. The power of a demonic bard allowed him to combine Forgebrand's techniques with the will of the soul itself, allowing the soul to create their own, most fitting body, given enough power. Though he couldn't take full credit for this, as the spark of the idea came from his encounter with Alzalsar, a person with a soul and an ego so powerful she could materialize her body herself, given a proper medium. This was what gave him the idea to try and supplement power and ego to the point he was able to create the Fae and Asterion as artificial living beings. Forgebrand didn't have that. So what could Forgebrand do, as he couldn't leave it to the souls to heal and grow a body of flesh and blood of its own? Seth's assumption was that he created Sivri as close to the appearance she had when alive and infused her soul into this body made of epic arcane gold, then added her to the spirit smithy to preserve her until he found a way to revive her properly. It was safe to say he failed, though he didn't know whether he died too early, or lost his way before he succeeded. Although it was a depressing story, feeling sorry or curious for Forgebrand's life story wasn't the point for all of his reflections. What all of this culminated in was Seth's intention to not just copy how his predecessor had created Sivri or Cerberus. Although the soul augur Urson had been cleansed by the system to give it as a reward, at least this was Seth's assumption. He wanted to honor the man's poor fate and at least give him a proper body. If this meant that in the end he would fail to incorporate his new enchantment assistant into the soul smithy, that he was okay with that. Although the potential of failure still made him feel nervous, it would not change the fact that he would have another capable enchanter at his side that would help him decode the mysteries of the Cloud Continent's artificers. Carrying the bars of refined fey steel Tord had prepared for him, Seth stepped to the forge. Wearing the Wraith Guard and Radiant Forge right, he welcomed the familiar warmth of the soul flame blowing against him. For starters, he placed 10 billion Argentine pesos in the fire. Once they were up to heat, Seth started swinging Karen's obel to melt in the soul and draw out the bigger parts for the inner frame of the Faer. In the past, Seth had always chosen one of the most durable materials at his disposal for this. Then he would have made up for a lack of conductivity by using inlays of metals with a higher mana conductivity for the enchantments. Lately he would opt to use something like Olympian silver, which was good in both. The reason he usually chose strong materials was that Faer could easily regenerate their soft tissue, but fixing damage in their frames would sap away their mana, meaning they would become inactive quicker, if the metal was easily damaged. But this was of no concern now. For his enchantment assistant, Seth chose to make him purely from the most conductive material, disregarding the lack of durability. After all, he was not meant to fight, at all. There was no reason to optimize the assistant for combat. On the contrary, the golem needed to be able to move and control his mana as minutely as possible when enchanting, which needed proper mana conductivity. The better the material for it, the smoother they would be able to cast their magic and skills. Another advantage of highly conductive metals like refined fey steel was the ease of forging. Not only did it heat up quickly, but also reacted well to energy manipulation. With Seth's experience over the past years, forging the bigger parts of the frame took barely 1 hour. However, he was far from over. The lion part of this build would happen at the jewelry station. To ensure the smoothness of operation and movement, Seth intended to put special care in refining and polishing the frame parts, before engraving the magic circuits that would allow them to move. Although the blacksmith had never been neglectful of this part, he had never put much effort into fully replicating the full range of movement of a human skeleton. Since people usually didn't use the full range of the more delicate construction of their body, like their hands, this wasn't a problem, either. They had usually been at the level of Alzalsar's vessel, and the sorceress never had a complaint. But he wanted to put in the extra effort, to make sure there would be nothing but his own skill levels holding back the golem in his work. This way, after several more hours of sitting at the jeweler's table, Seth finished all parts for the most delicate frame yet. Looking at the clock, he let out a deep sigh. How quickly the time goes by, if you do something you enjoy. I will go to bed. See you tomorrow, Sivri. With the parts finished, he decided to move engraving them to the next day. There was no need to pull all-nighters at this point. He had done more than enough of those in the past weeks. Good night, Seth.